We have some big news to discuss today, including a new contract for Mathew Barzal. Corey Crawford has announced his retirement. We have some more news on the waiver wire and a pretty big trade rumor involving Pierre Luc Dubois possibly heading to Western Canada. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about here today. One of the big surprise things that happened today was Corey Crawford of the Devils announcing his retirement. Now, we announced yesterday that there was news on Corey Crawford indicating that he was taking a personal leave of absence for an indefinite period of time. He had been missing from the Devils' workouts and skating practices for the past 4 days. And we really didn't know what was going on with them. And he's decided to not come back. He's already made it clear that he is retiring. Retirement papers are officially filed, and it's not a situation where he's going to end up on long-term injury reserve either for the Devils. He's officially just done, so he won't be paid for the season. So we don't know exactly what went into the decision. Some of it could be health-related. He did put out a statement indicating that he thought he would be able to continue playing, but it feels that he's given all he can to the game and that he just can't go anymore. So I'm not sure if he's had any recurring issues with concussions or maybe he lost his desire to play. I don't know, but I know earlier in the offseason, it seemed like he was quite ambitious to play. We know he came back in the bubble in the 2020 playoffs, and he did play there and actually played relatively well, too. It had a good showing for the Blackhawks. It was very big in their upset of the Oilers in the qualifying round. So, we don't really know all the reasons, of course, but ultimately, I guess he felt he just can't play anymore. So it's unfortunate for New Jersey, who signed him to be somewhat of a backup or a 1A, 1B with Mackenzie Blackwood. Obviously, Crawford's got 10 years in the NHL now, a couple of Stanley Cups, had a pretty solid career. The fact he's had to battle back from numerous concussions and different brain injuries is certainly, quite remarkable that he's been able to play as long as he has. A solid guy, so we certainly wish him all the best moving forward, and hopefully, he can have a good quality of life and everything for the rest of that time. Obviously, he's got a young family too, and ultimately decided that it wasn't in him to play any longer. But that certainly comes as a surprise, and you can't help but wonder what New Jersey might do next. I mean, we contemplated what the future might hold for Devils goaltending a little bit yesterday, knowing that he was at least on a long-term leave of absence, and we didn't know how long he was going to be gone. Obviously, they do have a, somewhat of a, you can call him a veteran, but just not really a veteran of NHL action, Scott Wedgwood. I'm not really sure the Devils are going to want to go with a combo of Blackwood and Wedgwood for the year. So they very well could go onto the goalie market to find somebody with a little bit more experience. Of course, we saw yesterday that Scott Darling was released from his PTO of Florida. Maybe they give him a crack. I'm not really sure. But there really isn't a lot of free agents out there that they could just go sign. A lot of goaltender movement took place earlier in the offseason. They were, pretty quick to sign Crawford in that process, and now there's not a ton of other options. So it would have to be via trade. I mean, there are some teams out there that have been rumored to be considering making a goalie trade that might have more than one goaltender that they're content with. For example, the Carolina Hurricanes have been in the rumor mill for a long time with either Mrazek or Reimer moving on. We've heard about the Jackets earlier in the offseason considering making a move on either Korpisalo or Elvis Merzlikins. But, it really depends on what they can offer up in return. So I don't know how urgent New Jersey is going to put on this situation, given the fact that they're probably not expecting a huge, high result in the standings this year. So maybe they run with Blackwood as much as they can, give some of the younger guys more of a chance. I don't know. I guess we will see. But obviously there's an opportunity there if they want to add some more depth and some more experience. Now, of course, the other big news today was we finally have a contract for RFA Mathew Barzal. I've been reporting that I've been hearing it's going to be a 3-year deal, somewhere around $6 million or better. Obviously, it's kind of the figures I've been hearing. It came in at 7, which is slightly higher than what I had seen online through the rumor mill. But still, that's a pretty fair contract given the fact that before everything hit, we kind of expected, of course, pre-pandemic, that Barzal was likely looking at a 6 to 8 year deal, somewhere in that $9 to $10 million range. So to get it down to that is decent. Obviously, Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders are still, contemplating moving some money out, but they obviously have to register the contracts for the other guys they have signed, Matt Martin, Andy Green, Corey Schneider, Schneider's contract can probably be buried. You can probably sign him and put him through waivers. That's a possibility there. So unless they want to keep him at the NHL level and carry 3 goalies, that's going to be tough to do as well. But the Islanders, with Boychuk's contract going on long-term injury reserve, have a couple of easy methods through roster manipulation to get cap compliant without necessarily having to move money out, but they have been shopping guys like Thomas Hickey and Leo Komarov, as we mentioned before as well, just trying to get themselves a little bit more flexibility. So we'll see if that materializes into anything. I don't really think it will. Obviously it's something they'd like to do, but I don't think there's a ton of interest in those kind of players. So we'll see what happens, but great news on the Burzell contract. I think it's a pretty fair deal. He will still be a restricted free agent, but this time with arbitration rights when that contract expires. Like all other contracts we've really seen, it is backloaded. It's going to cause him to get a fairly substantial qualifying offer above $7 million in 3 years' time. But if he continues to develop and improve like he has been so far in his ELC, I would think that it's not going to be an issue, and he's going to be well worth the money longer term. So obviously it'd be nice to get him going here. I do believe he was in camp today after getting the contract signed and sealed and delivered. So that gives him enough time to get up to speed here before their first game. So good news there for the Isles. Now we also saw some movement on the waiver wire. We had a ton of players on waivers yesterday, and we had a couple of players actually end up getting claimed. The first of the season so far, we saw defenseman Djoos, who of course was with the Anaheim Ducks and placed on waivers so he could be assigned to their American Hockey League team, and he ended up getting claimed by the Detroit Red Wings. Now, as I mentioned before, Detroit and LA were 2 teams that were looking to possibly take advantage of other team situations and maybe add a little bit more veteran depth. They could handle some contracts. They have the space to do so. And in Detroit's case, they could certainly use an extra, someone experienced blue liner. So that's an easy grab for them off the waiver wire. Of course, Djoos was with the Capitals for a fair bit of time. Got moved to Anaheim a while back. And really, they signed a lot of defensemen on one-year deals. So they had to put a few through waivers. They could even end up with more, to be honest. So they knew they were probably at risk for this to happen. So clearly they didn't mind, losing somebody because they have a lot of guys there under contract. We also saw defenseman Gustav Forsling of the Hurricanes get put through the waiver wire and be claimed by the Florida Panthers. Again, another team that, not surprising, they would want to add some blue line depth after trading away a few blue liners throughout the offseason so far. It makes sense for them to have some extra depth there as well. Everybody else from yesterday did end up clearing. We have more players on waivers today. We're going to get a lot of this here in the days ahead as we approach NHL season starting towards the end of training camp as teams decide who's going to their American Hockey League rosters depending on contracts and who's waiver exempt and not. Like, for example, today we have from the Maple Leafs, goaltender Michael Hutchison is on waivers for the purpose to be assigned. The Nashville Predators had several guys on waivers as well, including big defenseman Ben Harper, Michael McCarron, former Hab, and a former Leaf goaltender for their American Hockey League team, Casimir Kiskusio. So a lot of guys there likely do clear and end up going back down to the AHL. There's other players as well on waivers today, but nobody that's really likely to be claimed, nobody that really has any amount of experience, and that should likely clear and end up going to the minor leagues. Now, unfortunately as well, there was another bit of a COVID incident here today involving NHL teams. The Pittsburgh Penguins ended up having to cancel practice due to an abundance of caution. That's like the wording they're using now before they really know what's going on. We don't really know what came of it or what the details are. We won't unless something further does result. They end up with a positive test or anything like that. But the Penguins had to cancel, so that's not a good sign. It's a few teams now that have been impacted. So we will see. Now, we also reported, of course, yesterday that Dallas had a bunch of positive tests, which was unfortunate for them. They're going to be sidelined for a while until they get everybody isolated and through that process to be cleared. And the Columbus Blue Jackets had to cancel practice yesterday, and they did put a bunch of people in quarantine just again, out of the abundance of caution, as they say. But it looks as though I think they're going to be released, or they may have already. I think whatever they were concerned about might have been able to be cleared. So that's good news on the Columbus front, but not so good news on Pittsburgh. We'll wait further information as they go through that process. But this is something we're probably going to see a fair bit. I just hope it doesn't come to the point that they have to cancel games or, they get too much of it that they have to consider pausing the season. Because right now, COVID is kind of somewhat out of control in a lot of areas across North America. So I just hope they can get through this without too many issues. Now, speaking of COVID-related stuff in the NHL, the Tampa Bay Lightning unfortunately had to change their minds on allowing fans into the building to start the season. So there was 4 teams that were going to be able to start the NHL season with a limited amount of fans, including the 2 teams in the state of Florida and Arizona as well. But the Lightning they're changing their mind due to the rapid increase in cases in that area. So unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So I'm sure Lightning fans are likely not too pleased. They're not going to be able to go to games now, but it's probably for the best of everybody's safety. Right now, I don't have any information on the Florida Panthers. I think it's certainly more of a regionally based issue. So we'll see. But I guess we're down to 3 teams now that will be starting the NHL season with fans, and we don't have any further word on the schedule being rejigged, because obviously we know, based on what happened yesterday with the Dallas Stars, that a few of their games are going to have to be moved around to accommodate everything, because they're going to be a little late starting now due to all the players and coaching staff having to isolate for some time. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have a pretty juicy trade rumor, in my opinion. This one comes from Pierre Luc Dubois of TSN and The Athletic, talking about Jackets center iceman Pierre Luc Dubois, who's really all the talk around the NHL right now, because many NHL insiders feel that a trade is not only likely, but likely to happen sooner than later, as will be reported before and recently here. Many feel that it's in everybody's best interest if they can get this done sooner than later, so that it doesn't become a longer-term distraction to the team. At the end of the day, the Jackets and Jarmo Kekalainen, they need to do what's best for them. They need to deal with it for at least a period of time to get the best deal possible. If they have to trade their top young center iceman, which I'm sure they're not crazy about doing, but at the end of the day, if he doesn't want to be there, and they might have to find a way to try to accommodate, but it's difficult to say how long it could drag out. Now, I guess the good news from the Jacket side of things is that there's a ton of teams interested. LeBron was reporting the other day about 7 teams that he felt were good destinations, but at the end of the day, that's just a tip of the iceberg for teams that he was able to get some information on, or that he felt made good sense. But there's several other teams. I think when a player like this comes up, you're going to have probably 3/4 of the league at least check in, kick some tires, talk it over, see what you think, because he would be an upgrade for a lot of teams. He may not be a number 1 center on everybody's team, but he'd be at 1 or 2, and he's young, he's dynamic, he's still getting better, he's still developing. So it's it only makes sense. You don't get a lot of opportunities like this, so when they come up, you have to, as a manager of a team, look to see if you can make your team better. Now, one of the items that he talks about here that he felt made a lot of sense was the possible trade and hookup with the Calgary Flames. Of course, I'd mentioned before about Western Canada being a possible landing spot and destination for Dubois, and it is amongst several other teams. Like, really, we could probably talk about, like I said, 3/4 of the teams in the league and talk about mock trades and all that, and there's bound to be a ton of rumors on this guy as the different local media sources kind of, kick tires on what trades could look like for their team to make this acquisition here. But he speculates the Flames, obviously, as we know, have talked about, internally about shaking up the core for some time. Obviously, guys like Monahan and Gaudreau especially are prime targets for potential movement if they really wanted to shake things up in Calgary. Now, I don't think a deal like this would be obviously imminent or anything like that, so I think we'll start the season, and obviously it's going to drag on for a little while. The Jackets aren't going to rush into this, as I said. They need to take their time. They can let teams continue to make offers. And as teams kind of become more in need, more desperate for the services of a player like him that really want to go for it, especially this year, then the offers are likely bound to get better. So like I said, it could drag on for a while. It could make it to the trade deadline. It could even go to the draft if the offers aren't good enough. But we know it's going to take a big package depending on what teams are willing to offer here. But at the end of the day, LeBron suggests a potential trade, and he mainly talks about it as a 1-for-1, but I don't necessarily see it being that way, but a Sean Monahan for Pierre Luc Dubois. So Monahan, as we know, is a bit older than Dubois. 4 years older, 26 years old. Is a 3-time 30-goal scorer. Like, he's a really solid top goal-scoring center. Like, he's a productive guy. He's had a solid career so far. Get to Calgary, jump to the NHL fairly quick after being drafted, and he's still pretty young himself. Obviously not as young as Dubois, though. And the idea of them moving on from possibly Monahan and or Gaudreau in different trades is a real possibility. Now, especially if we see the Flames stumble. We know that Brad Treliving in Calgary made a lot of movements this offseason. They're pretty much the Calgary Canucks now after all the guys they picked up from Vancouver. Obviously, they got a solid starting goaltender, Jacob Markstrom, so that area's been addressed. They certainly made some changes to the blue line. Obviously got Chris Tanev. They got some forwards. Some different forwards in there as well, some from Calgary as well. So clearly, they're a different looking team, but a lot of the core pieces remain the same. They still have Gaudreau, Monahan, Lindholm, Backlund, up front, and you still got some other younger players in the system that, are question marks, like a Sam Bennett. Of course, you got Dylan Dubé. They have some good young pieces as well on the way. So, is it time to shake up the core? I don't think it is right at the start of the year, but as time goes on, like I said, if they stumble or they're getting later into the year and they're just not looking the way they need to be to make it in a tough Canadian division, I can see a scenario unfold where they really seriously inquire on this potential deal. Now, in the case of Dubois, like I said, I don't see that being a one-for-one deal. I think Columbus is going to say, well, our center iceman has a slightly cheaper contract, so the Flames are saving money, and he's 4 years younger, so you're going to have to up the ante here. It's going to have to be more than that for Dubois. I would think they're going to have to throw in a pick or a prospect or something, or maybe the deal gets expanded and maybe it's not a one-for-one trade. But we know that Kekalainen seems to be kind of fond for those one-for-one somewhat, and that a lot of people in the NHL insider world seem to think that he might look to possibly do a deal like he did with Ryan Johansson, a straight-up one-for-one swap where he got Seth Jones. But it really boils down to if Columbus wants the package to be able to continue to be competitive now, or if they want more of a package that includes futures and younger prospects and draft picks. So hard to say what they want, but Sean Monahan would not be a bad replacement if they have to trade Dubois. Like you said, he's not quite as young, but he's still young enough that he can be a top center. You throw him into the mix with Max Domi. Monahan Domi as your 1-2 punch is really not that bad. I mean, there's certainly are stronger duos across the NHL, but it gives Calgary a chance to change things up. Can you imagine Pierre Luc Dubois and Matthew Tkachuk being with that team in Calgary long term? From a Flames perspective, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, as much as you like Monahan there, they get 4 years younger. They get a guy who can be equally as productive, in my opinion, and they get him locked up to a longer term contract along with Matthew Tkachuk. Those two guys could be, the top line players for the Flames for the next decade, really. I mean, I think if they traded Monahan, they probably would trade Gaudreau as well. I personally am not convinced that Gaudreau wants to stay in Calgary beyond the rest of his contract. So we will see, but it's certainly a very interesting trade idea. Let me know if you think this trade would be a bigger, more complicated trade. Do you think a one-for-one deal would be sufficient? I really don't think it would be. I think Columbus is going to be looking for more money. I think Columbus is going to be looking for more in return, given Dubois' age and his long-term projected growth here. So let me know what your thoughts are down below, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.